When it comes to modern dramatic horror, with several new directors blending in psychology, mystery, and classic fantasy, there are very few films as vivid and transportive as Nosferatu. And to create a film with this much of an atmosphere, director Robert Eggers pulls from an endless list of inspirations, from classic films and artwork, to European folklore, to even cultural styles of dance. And by exploring every one of them, we can uncover a new understanding of Lily-Rose Depp's character and performance, the vampire's unique design, costume, and facial hair, and so much more about the never-ending detail within this movie. So this video will be divided into 3 sections: the origin, the folklore, and the artistry of Nosferatu in this spoiler-free analysis. The origin, temptations of a sleepwalker. For anyone who doesn't already know, Nosferatu 2024 is a remake of the original Nosferatu in 1922. The silent film set in the early 1800s was an unofficial adaptation of the 1897 novel Dracula. The movie was titled Nosferatu, an archaic Romanian term for vampire, for infringement-related reasons, since the creators didn't have the rights to an official Dracula adaptation. After stripping down and slightly altering the story, Nosferatu is remembered as one of the most pivotal classics in film history. And although director Robert Eggers was always familiar with Dracula and has read the novel, he's always felt himself gravitate much more strongly to the story of Nosferatu. Something that I know stayed with me as a young person and as an adult is that the director Murnau and his collaborators turned the Stoker novel into a fairy tale. And I actually think it's that fairy tale within the Stoker novel that has been more influential than the Stoker novel as a whole. And within the story of Nosferatu, what drew Eggers in the most to put his own stamp on his rendition was the relationship between Ellen and the vampire, Count Orlok. In the original version, Ellen is a somnambulist, a sleepwalker, and in the early 19th century, that meant to people, including many doctors, that you had an insight into another realm. This was very exciting. This is something I can play with. This is something I can explore. And Eggers continues by explaining how he explores that concept by making Ellen's relationship with Nosferatu romantic. We have this woman who doesn't fit. She's an outsider. She doesn't fit in 19th century society. No one understands her. She's alone, and she has a deep understanding of something she doesn't have language for. And her husband loves her, and she loves her husband, but he doesn't get it. She's called melancholic, she's called hysteric, and she's pulled to this darkness. And the only person that she can connect with is a demon lover, a vampire. Essentially, Eggers is saying that Ellen's romantic relationship with the vampire is an outlet for her feelings of curiosity, temptation, and inner darkness. All feelings that are very natural yet are continuously suppressed by the expectations placed upon her as a woman in the early 19th century. So let's discuss what's risen Orlok from his grave and how Eggers has decided to create him in the next section of this video. The Folklore, Rebirth of Orlok. If you're a fan of Robert Eggers, you surely know that his biggest trademark as a director is historical accuracy. The languages, the costumes, the set design, it all needs to look and feel the way it once really was. His reason for this being that historical accuracy makes the world within the film feel that much more vivid and immersive. So in preparing this vampire story, Eggers dug as deeply as he could into Romanian history and folklore, collecting the writings and stories of those who truly believed in vampires, starting in the early 18th century. At the time, the belief in vampires provided an explanation for the misunderstood plagues, epidemics, and unexplained deaths. A vampire was believed to be a troubled spirit within a corpse that can lift that corpse from its grave and wreak all types of havoc on the community. Transylvanian folklorist Heinrich von Wieslacki describes the Nosferatu to specifically seek sexual intercourse with the young women in their sleep, which very obviously explains the vampire's romantic sexual relationship with Ellen, specifically in her dreams when sleeping. As you can see in a scene from the new film and not in the original, these Romani people referred to as gypsies, killing a vampire by driving an iron stake through its heart, which was their real believed way to kill a vampire and where that cliche originates. And when it comes to the design of Count Orlok, Eggers pulled from this same history and folklore. These vampires of early folklore are walking putrid corpses. And so then, of course, the question I ask myself is, what would a dead Transylvanian nobleman actually look like? And with a bit of research, you get what you have on screen. With the facial features and costume to very closely match a Transylvanian nobleman, and almost all of which have facial hair, as Eggers explains, and at the very least, a mustache. He also speaks ancient Dacian during his incantations in the film, a dead language that the ancestors of the ethnic Romanians had spoken. And author Eggers paid close attention to Montagu Summers, who has performed rigorous academic studies on vampires in Romania, highlights that these creatures are decaying, disgusting, maggot-ridden corpses, which explains the unapologetically grotesque creature design and makeup for Orlok in this film in particular. And now, having discussed the foundation of these characters and this world, let's move into the inspiration behind Lily-Rose Depp's lead performance and the many meticulous details that make this world feel so real in the next section of this video. The artistry, immersion of detail. Even if you aren't familiar with the classic story of Dracula, you've still very likely seen Dracula and Count Orlok countless times in popular culture. And since Robert Eggers knew there was a never-ending number of Dracula films to be influenced by, he made a conscious effort not to investigate and pull inspiration from those films in particular. Instead, Eggers focuses on capturing the sentiment of the original 1922 movie while pulling artistic influence from many other works of art, films, paintings, and even styles of dance. For example, directing lead actress Lily-Rose Depp to channel elements of Isabelle Adjani's possession scenes in the film Possession, similarly centered around a woman holding in deeply repressed feelings and secrets while suffering through a troubled marriage. Eggers and Lily-Rose also studied a Japanese style of dance called Buto, which is performed to signify an emptying of the soul in order to let something new spiritually come inside, much like Ellen's journey throughout this film. And also, very interestingly, Eggers and Lily-Rose would study the illustrations commissioned by psychologist Jean-Martin Charcot of his patients with hysteria, documenting every pose they displayed during an episode. These images were used as a roadmap for Lily's positions, body language, and expressions throughout the film while possessed. From a directional standpoint, Eggers aimed to recapture the visual style and imagery in many other films, like the color scheme, lighting, and cinematography in 1971's The Third Part of the Night. The actors' positioning, staging, and blocking found in the Basil Rathbone Sherlock Holmes films, as well as the directional influence of Freddie Francis, which explains the similarity in imagery and style between Eggers' Nosferatu and Francis's Dracula's Risen from the Grave, even if unintentional. The musical score also recapturing the style of 1960s dramatic horror, with 1961's The Innocents as its primary influence, with the most dramatic orchestral strings along with the most fragile, innocent instruments often in the forefront. Most notably, the music in the opening scene, presenting this dollhouse, jack-in-the-box, wind-up toy melody, leading this epic, haunting, dramatic horror orchestra. And very much like 2024's Nosferatu, 1961's The Innocents is centered around youthful, innocent victims being consumed by a demonic force of spiritual possession. And when it comes to the body horror, the sound design was inspired by the 1991 Japanese film 964 Pinocchio, an undeniably disgusting film with such strikingly vivid sound design, which most certainly birthed a sound Nosferatu viewers will never forget. The sound of Orlok feeding on his victims. Eggers also highlights how the original Nosferatu was released in the early 1900s, but is set in the early 1800s, because the director F.W. Murnau and his team at the time wanted to capture the culture of German Romanticism in the early 19th century. Nosferatu's visuals replicate the moody imagery of these classic German Romanticism painters like David Caspar Friedrich, as well as Johann Christian Dahl, who was highly influential on these German painters of the period. And most interestingly, German Romanticism of the 19th century was an artistic and philosophical movement, pushing back on the emerging culture of development through science, order, and mechanization, and focusing on emotion, art, nature, and mystery. Coincidentally, a philosophy Eggers embraces in his entire filmography and style as a director, in the midst of this hyper-futuristic world he and his audience live in today. From The Witch, to The Lighthouse, to The Northman, and now Nosferatu. One of the most meticulously transportive creators of our time.